Hello? Oh, we have quite some noise to compete with, but is it okay? Audio? Okay. Closer? Is this better? Okay, there's also headsets for everyone who can't hear me, but I'll try to be very clear and speak into the mic. We're going to kick off. Welcome, everyone, in this session in focus, driving cooperation for food and agriculture under changing climate. And this title of In Focus is really what we'll be trying to do today. We'll be taking a snapshot of where we're at and where we can go from here, using kind of the metaphor of a camera. But we're housed here at the Action on Food Hub. So before we kick off, I want to invite Glyndis Luciano from EIT Food, who's been the driving force behind this home for food here at COP, to just welcome us and kick us off.
All right, good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. As Leanne said, we're going to be competing with the noise, but hopefully we'll be able to hear me clearly. So I'm Glyndis Virginia Luciano, and I am indeed part of EIT Food and also the Action on Food Hub Managing Lead. So it is a pleasure to be here representing the Secretariat of the Action on Food Hub. So what is the aim of the Action on Food Hub? Why are we here today? So we're here to convene the food systems and climate community. So oftentimes, we find ourselves in spaces where it's just the agriculture community, just the climate community, just nature community. And we've really have been working very hard to kind of bring together all of these different silo communities. And to give you an example, just yesterday and the day before, we actually had the Global Landscapes Forum here hosting their GLF climate conference, bringing in the topic of forestry, of investments into forest, into agroforestry production systems as well, all over the world. Now, in terms of who makes up the Action on Food Hub, so this year we're actually 17 partners that have come together, and that's a huge increase from when we first started. And I will in a bit tell you exactly the origin story, because I think it's so important to always reflect of where we come from. We always think of the future, but I think it's important to always take a little bit of time to reflect where we've started so that we can know where we can go next and have better ideas on that. So we are 17 partners this year, and part of those partners include S&B. Is that me? Okay. S&B, it includes CASH, just to give you an idea, ProVeg International, ERI, the Environmental Defense Fund. But we're also, we used to be two different pavilions previously. And so I think that it's important to just discuss of what we have become. So we convene all of these different types of groups. We've been able to manage to come together to develop not just programming together, but also a joint policy position coming in as well together. We've also opened up the space to be able to connect to the negotiations. How exactly? Building the relationships with negotiators across the years, bringing them in for very specific workshops into the space. We know that negotiation spaces themselves can be very formal settings, and so we've opened up the space for people to be able to come in to kind of provide their input, to also know that this is a one-stop shop, essentially, where the community is here to support them. Now, in terms of the actual origin story, it's all started with a conversation between ClimEat, actually. And so I want to recognize their work, as well as S&B being one of the founding partners with the generous support of the Dutch Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries, Food Security, and Nature. I really hope I got the whole name. And so with the generous support, they actually brought together some core partners from the food systems to really drive the force of we need food and agriculture in the climate agenda. It cannot be siloed. We do contribute as a system 30% of emissions, and we are aware of that. And we were kind of villainized as a community, but we have come in to show we can also be part of the solution, and here are the solutions that the community is working on, right? And so I just wanted to mention that because it has been a very long process to get here. And I just want to give really very much a huge thank you to ClimEat, to S&B, and also to the Dutch Ministry of Agriculture for the continuous support. And I really hope that we can have a wonderful conversation here of In Focus, being targeted, being strategic. It's been 4 years since we started this collaboration, and so I think it's a very good time to reflect here being at COP30. Thank you very much.
That was my phone. It's okay. I was going to talk about my phone actually, because I this morning had a look at how many pictures I took in the last, I think, 10 days. It's 323 pictures. So a lot of snapshots around COP. And that's really the focus of today as well. Hi, Anna Maria. See, you're already here. We're going to talk with Anna Maria and lots of other partners around reflecting on what have we been doing, what has been our focus in the past 9 days here at COP, also in the lead up to this, but also, like Glinda said, reflect on how can we be more strategic. There will be quite a lot of Dutch partners in the room, but also some global partners. How can we be strategic in driving this agenda forward? How can we connect the dots even better? So that's really the focus of today. So yeah, if COP is this fast-moving film of all these different things, we're going to take a snapshot, reflect, and then shift the camera also on how do we go from here. So I want to invite someone to take the first picture, I guess, to really kick us off and kind of just share, where we're at the moment, and from the Netherlands, the reflection so far. So for that, I want to invite Janeta Mulabegovic. I hope I didn't butcher your name. Okay, perfect, nice. The Policy Coordinator on Food and Nutrition Security at the Inclusive Green Growth Department of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Janeta, please come up.
Good morning, everyone. It's really a privilege to join this conversation today. I am part of the team working on, as Marielle says, on food security and nutrition. It is my first COP, and this will be more of a prologue, of an introductory shot than anything else. As you might have noticed, the Netherlands doesn't have a pavilion this year. Instead, we're trying to be present in other spaces that matter, space like Action on Food Hub. So thank you, Glendis, very much for hosting us here today. And this meeting feels a little bit like a Dutch Mutirao, where we bring Dutch partners and global partners around the table to discuss food system transformation. Something that we're familiar with, especially considering the way we work with our Dutch Diamond approach, and something which is particularly relevant when it comes to food systems transformation, where it really matters to bring together different kinds of actors on intersecting aspects and sectors. We will have today speakers directly involved in negotiations, and some of us, or most of us, working more on the action agenda. I'm part of the latter team, working for a team back at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, programming, designing and managing a development cooperation program focusing on food security and nutrition at the range about 400 million euros on an annual basis, working with smallholder farmers, focusing on nutrition, focusing on sustainable use of land and soil, on market integration. And within all of this program, we are increasingly seeking to integrate climate into it. And I came to this COP with a task to really listen, to connect, and to make sure that I understand how to support, how to better align our programming with the overall climate approach and policy. So thank you so much to our speakers and to all of you for joining this conversation and for sharing your insights. We will do our best to make use of it and bring it back to The Hague. Thank you.
Yes, thanks for that first shot. And I think you're also hinting to what we really want this session to be is also a conversation. So we're going to have a kickoff presentation, but then after that we'll also really just invite others to exchange and share insights. So that was the first snapshot. I'm now going to invite Daan Schuttebelt to make a panorama, I guess, from where we're at as a scene setting. Daan Schuttebelt, she's the impact and measurement strategist and accelerator at Climate, but she's been working the past year also on reflecting maybe more broadly also on what's the state of multilateralism, where are we now? And I think that's a very accurate question that we also maybe in this room also have. So Dan's going to just quickly give us a snapshot or a panorama of the different sections, and then we'll dive into the conversation. So Dan, over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to try and keep this short and sweet, not only because I have to run to another event, but also so you can really get into the meat of the action, which is the discussion and hearing from all of you. So, multilateralism is failing. Funding is shrinking. Climate goals are slipping. This is something we're all aware of. And I think it really has set the context for this COP, but also just generally has really dominated the conversations, I think, over the past few months. And for us, that started earlier this year in Costa Rica, where we brought together a group of high-level experts and leaders in the space, some of whom are in this room, like Ana Maria, and others whose organizations are present here as well. And we wanted to discuss with these people what is needed to accelerate food systems transformation. One big thing that came out is that we felt like we needed a new narrative, or at least a shifting of a narrative. So although we don't feel like we can actually create a new narrative, we did a scan of existing narratives and identified 5 elements for a new framing that we hope to kind of use moving forward. I want to emphasize that these are not new or original ideas necessarily, but we hope that with these 5 elements we can create kind of an understanding and coherent messaging, as well as kind of push forward collective action between actors working in the system. So I'm going to go really briefly. Oh, this is the paper, sorry. It'll come back at the end. I'm going to go really briefly over the 5 elements that we identified. The first is a multiplicity of narratives. So this speaks to the fact that there's always going to be a lot of different narratives. There's many paths, but really what we need to focus on is the connections between these narratives and where we can work together. The second one is localism. I think this is something that we often, or that we hear a lot, but it really emphasizes the importance of speaking to local communities, including them in the process, letting them drive the process, and relying on their knowledge. The third one is justice. This one is really viewing food as a common good, or food systems as a common good, and focusing on leaving no one behind by going beyond just thinking of food and agriculture, but also focusing on livelihoods. The fourth one, positivity. As it says, hope is a renewable resource. This is really about shifting our messaging a little bit, so rather than a lot of the doom and gloom and focusing on the problems, our messaging needs to be honest, it needs to be targeted, it needs to be tailored to the right context, and we maybe need to make it a little bit more simple and coherent in order to work towards opportunities. Which brings me to the last one, which is profitability, or as we refer to it in the paper, is outcompeting old systems. And this really, again, looks at viewing transformation as an opportunity and looking at the benefits. So presenting it as a business case, which really pays off in the long run for different audiences. So just to set the scene, I wanted to connect these elements to COP, or COP30 specifically. So the first one, multiplicity. It's really crucial to have all voices in the room, as I said. I think there can be some criticism on the COP process, that it's a lot of dialogue, no progress. But I think here in the Blue Zone and the actors that are here coming together is really a show of how we are bringing lots of different voices together, actors that work on different things. And we really need to challenge ourselves to think outside the framing and find those connections, and maybe have discussions with people that you may not necessarily agree with, but figuring out how you can move forward. The second one is localism. So NDCs and NAPs are really the pathway for local ambition embedded in the UNFCCC process. It's the way in which we can translate a global vision into local action. And there's a lot of work that's being done around that. But as you can see in the graph here, there's still this ambition gap that I think is being discussed a lot. So the question moving forward is really how can we close this gap and translate this vision to local action and contextualize that to countries specifically. The third one is justice. There have been protests. We've all heard of them, we've seen them, and I think this is always an issue at COP, and it highlights that there are still issues of inclusion. But these protests previously have often been silenced, and this year I think you can say that diversity has been celebrated a little bit more, and we've invited some of these conversations into the Blue Zone and beyond. There's been a lot of focus on indigenous populations and gender that I've seen. And then specifically the Just Transitions work program has talked a lot about this emphasis on leaving no one behind and making sure that, justice is relevant to mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. Fourth one is positivity. This is said to be the COP of action. Anna Maria is putting a thumbs up. Negotiations can be super frustrating. I'm sure we'll hear from other people in the room. But there has been a lot of focus on action outside of the negotiations. And I think there's a couple of different ways we've seen these. The first is the plans to accelerate solutions. I keep forgetting the term. But this is a way that we've been pivoting towards actions and solutions rather than just, feeling like we're talking about the same thing over and over again. And then, so there's been 150 plans, which is great. And then another way has been the Agricultural Solutions Showcase in the AgriZone. If you haven't been, I would recommend going, which is a way that we really showcase opportunities and solutions and the fact that these innovations are already there and we just need action to push them forward. Then the last one is this profitability aspect. Dialogue and action, or talking about action, is great, but we need to talk about the F word, which is finance, which often comes up at COPs and is maybe a bit of a contentious issue often. But this year I've really seen a focus in terms of profitability for profit for smallholders. So a lot of discussion on payment for ecosystem services, subsidy repurposing, and carbon markets, specifically under Article 6. And that's been a discussion for a while, but there's really a need to drive consensus on that. So yeah, I think there's a long way to go, but we're already making some steps. That's a bit of a scene setting for all of you. I hope that it can inspire action today and also urge you to think beyond the Beyond COP agenda, but also the outside COP agenda. So thanks all. I'm going to hand it back to Leanne.
Thanks for that, Dan. Yes. That's not an easy task, trying to give this landscape overview of all the things that are happening at COP, not just on food and agriculture, but just more generally. But thanks for that. Now we're going to take snapshots. So we're going to zoom in a bit more on hear from a couple of specific people. What have they been working on? What has their focus been? Has it been sharp enough for them? So for that, I'm going to invite the panelists. I think we're still missing one. I know he's running here, but maybe Tom and Mariana, if you can come up. James, you can walk straight through. Amazing. I'm not going to introduce you myself. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves with the question, once you all sit down. I think, James, you can hold your phone in your hand because I'm going to ask you a question around your phones. We're talking about pictures and what's in focus. So I want to ask each of you to have a look in your phone and what's the last picture you've taken? And kind of use that also, like tickle your brain a bit. How can you use that to introduce yourself and your organization? And then with that, we're going to then, after that, I'll dive in a little bit more. Who can I ask first? Mariana, could I ask you?
Can you hear me? Wonderful. Okay, first of all, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for having me. And I want to apologize. The organizers know this firsthand, but I'm literally going to say my words and run out. So apologies for that, because I would have really liked to listen to the other panelists as well. So the last picture I took is actually a picture of a fisherman holding a pirarucu, paiche, known in Peru and other parts of the Amazon, which is this very large fish. I would say this picture, I would symbolize it as, the conversations are global, but ultimately action is local, and we're grounded in where we are. And here we're in the Amazon, which is a place very close and dear to my heart. I've spent over 10 years of my life working in the Amazon, so I'm really glad to be here in a different role, back again here. So
Organization.
I hope that was an okay snapshot.
Yes. Yeah, and so Marianne is with the NDC partnership, and we'll hear a lot more on what exactly they do. But maybe Tom, could I ask you to come in?
Well, the last picture I took was actually yesterday afternoon. My name is Tom. I'm with the Netherlands Ministry of Agriculture. And the last picture I took was of one of my EU negotiators, colleagues, bringing us 3 beers. And then I looked at the timestamp, and this was around 3:30 p.m. So I think we were a little bit dehydrated, and now I have to think about a very clever line how this connects to the COP. But I think, I think the connection is that we're all humans. So we're in all these spaces working really hard to try to do as much as we can with the time that we're given. But at the end of the day, we're all humans, and I think this is where also the cause of this COP really comes in and connects. We're doing this for everybody who is here. Everybody. It sounds a bit philanthropical, but we're doing it for the people. So and then having a beer at the end of the day is maybe and sometimes a caipirinha is a very nice moment to remember that we're in this together. So yeah.
Thanks, Tom. James, what's your last picture?
Okay, so I don't take photographs in ones. I only take streams of photographs. I'll tell you about the photographs rather than the photograph. The last photographs I've taken were last night with a group of people on a boat on the river that goes towards the mouth of the Amazon, right? And they were policymakers, politicians, members of the public, dancers, people selling food, because that's what all of this is about, right? It's all about connecting people so we understand each other, that we can see things from other bits and pieces, because at the end of the day, this is one part of the jigsaw puzzle, right? It's a necessary part of the jigsaw puzzle. We need to imagine things, we need to be able to agree things, but then we need to be able to see different perspectives to take it forward in other spaces.
Nice. Oh, I love those three very creative links. I'm gonna move to Mariana because I know you need to head out. But Dan explained also that like the NDCs and the NEPs, they are, I think, the most embedded piece for implementation in the UNFCCC process. But yeah, there's been a lot of talk around this being the implementation COP, and I would just like to ask from the NDC partnership, have you been working on that, translating them to implementation, and yeah, what's your key take from this COP?
Okay, so that's a big question. I would say the short answer to your question, have we been working on this? An absolute and resounding yes. But let me tell you a bit more for those of you who are not familiar with the NDC partnership, what we do, and then how does it translate into this question of this being the COP for implementation. So the NDC partnership is a global coalition that brings together developing countries, developed countries, and international institutions to work together to drive climate action. The way we work is we are here to support countries through the full cycle of NDCs. So from the NDC development process to NDC implementation and strengthening the country's capacities to access climate finance. The way we operate is we are country-led, country-driven. We don't bring an agenda to the countries. Our role is to understand what our member countries need, meet them where they're at, and then help them articulate those needs. What do they need in order to be able to design an NDC in a robust, ambitious, and comprehensive way. What do they need to advance on implementation? And then we turn to our wide network of development and implementing partners, and we put together a curated support. The NDC partnership started with, 30 members back in 2016 in Marrakesh. We're 260. So right now, I lead our process of country engagement, and we basically are engaging 109 developing countries right now with, you do the math, all the other partners that are trying to support them. We've been around for 9 years, and we have literally seen a journey of countries grappling with the incredibly complex and systemic issue of climate change and starting to put in place the enabling conditions to address them. This is not a sprint, this is a marathon. But what I can tell you is that even though, as you showed, there is this gap, and it's a gap that it keeps us all at night and that we need to address, we're seeing climate impacts devastating countries right now. The reality is that the transformation we're trying to effect is so profound that we also need to hold both the urgency and the patience as we help countries put in place the deeper transformation. Let me tell you a little bit right now what we have done, for example, for NDC 3.0. So the NDC partnership has been able to mobilize as a coalition support for 101 developing countries working on their NDCs 3.0. We mobilized over 40 partners, and we have mobilized in that process $78 million. And we have helped, part of what the partnership does is not just to match countries with partner needs, but to actually address the issue of duplication, lack of coordination, both on the government side and on the partner side. So for example, yesterday I was at the event of El Salvador, which presented very proudly an NDC that was stronger in quality. It had made some strides on ambition, but definitely one that has been more comprehensive in terms of process and approach. And 7 partners supported them, and we basically helped coordinate them. So what can I tell you? NDCs 3.0, we are seeing are at least the early lessons, because we've just been hit with a wave of all of the NDCs coming in, a lot of them really literally at the SCOP. But we're seeing improvements on the quality of the NDCs and being linked to national development plans in a way that they're becoming more strategic documents to guide decision-making, budgeting, and ultimately decisions across ministries. We're seeing them as efforts, improvements in the process, countries really engaging across ministries, subnationals, other actors, private sector, civil society, in a way that is creating more ownership. And we're seeing a more realistic improvement on the ambition side, but in a way that really pushes what countries need to do, but also with NDCs being more actionable, being clear on costs in a way that I think builds more confidence in the path ahead. Last thing that I will say is, are we involved in implementation? So we're helping countries set themselves up for implementation, but countries have been implementing all the way, even as they've been very busy preparing their NDC 3.0. Implementation hasn't stopped, it's ongoing. And let me come back to this question of synergies, and I wanted to bring maybe one look into one area. So the NDC partnership receives requests on all topics, all issues. We tag everything that countries ask of us, over 7,000 requests across sectors, including agriculture. But let me share with you this question. We're also trying to help countries address the synergies. And in one area that I'm very proud to say we've counted on the support on the Netherlands has been on this question of connection on the climate and water nexus, and how this impacts food systems, how this impacts energy, how this impacts health. Countries are really grappling with this question. And what we are seeing is that countries are grappling with basic issues such as data, how to have data to understand what their watersheds look like, to issues how to put in place financial mechanisms to to address payment for ecosystem services, to governance. So I want to say that at a time when multilateralism might be seen as faltering, I want to tell you the true and lived experience that collective action is possible. We're seeing it in the partnership, and we need to believe in it and maintain that positivity to drive this forward. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Mariana, I think you need to run off, but thanks so much. And I think I really like this duality that you also touched on, both like urgency, but also patience. And really, I think after when we exchange views, I think also it's good for us to reflect as like this community, how can we support NDC implementation? How can we kind of amplify the work that we're doing and kind of match that with also the requests and synergies that countries are looking for. So thanks so much. I know you need to head out. Thanks for joining us. So that's on the NDCs and the NEP processes, some reflections from Rihanna. But there's also been this very big action agenda led by the presidency. There's been, I think Dan mentioned, 150 plans to accelerate solutions that have been worked out. There's one on methane, one on fertilizers, and I know the CGIAR has been heavily involved in also a lot of these different elements. So there were 6 axes. So in axis 3, the presidency really centered food and agriculture in there. And yeah, James, I just kind of want to ask you, like, how has the CGIAR been working on the presidency agenda, supporting that? And what are you excited about in that?
Okay. How have we been working with the presidency? So I'd say far before COP is the first point, right? So we began trying to think with the presidency about this at the beginning when they were getting ready to take over the G20. Trying to understand what their priorities were. If I could just take a step back for a second and pick up on the NDC point, right, about multilateralism. Multilateralism is not working how we would want it to work, right? So instead of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, we try to understand what we can do to support it, right? And that's taken an approach to see how can we accelerate multilateral action by trying to identify a small number of countries in different areas that are prepared to move more quickly and to come back together to speak to their peers, because we're not their peers, right? We don't have the same problems that they have. We have a different set of problems. So that's the first part. So we, in our work with Brazil and in the Alliance of Champions, we're with 4 other countries: Sierra Leone, Cambodia, Norway, and Brazil. And Rwanda, sorry. We looked at what would be the entry points that would try to kickstart action for the COP presidency. And we identified 2: land restoration and climate finance. And that's where we have been putting our focus through a number of different passes that are joined up together, right? We've been working with it to on one side, to understand, to help countries report back. And today we've launched some progress reports from the countries of the Alliance of Champions, which will talk about how they have made progress. How they've made progress across 10 action areas across the whole food chain, at the very beginning around production, right down to food loss and waste, equality, gender, business, the whole way along. And they're reporting on that, and they're going to report on that every year. And in fact, we had 3 new countries that came in this week: Colombia, Vietnam, and Italy. And we're expecting to announce another 2 countries by the end of the year. So there's a real, and why? Not because CGIAR has been going and speaking to them, because the countries have been getting excited about doing what they're doing together, right? So that's the first pillar of action. The second pillar of action has been around the land restoration and the climate finance. Working with countries, trying to understand how CGIAR can unlock the risk from science to private investment. Bringing together different players from FAO, from private businesses, banks, and most importantly, I think, the Brazilian government. Now, you could look at this cynically and you could say, oh my God, 150 plans to accelerate solutions, that's too many. I'm a little bit more, let the best ones float to the top and the other ones will float away. I don't want to eliminate the ideas and then sort of say, no, everybody has to fit in a specific box. We know it doesn't work, because what happens? People go off and do their other things outside. I'm a big believer in the Brazilian idea of the mutirão, right? Have people align to ideas of where you want to go and allow them to do it in different ways. I think at the moment this is super important to get back to where I began, to the multilateral process. Let's not tell countries that the multilateral process works. Let's demonstrate that small numbers of countries can actually do things and try to generate a little bit of excitement into a multilateral process that we know we can't move forward without.
Yeah, thanks, James, for that. Yeah, you weren't here for Dan's presentation, but I love the note on positivity and kind of positive examples. And yeah, even if you make the assessment that multilateralism isn't delivering.
Can I just say just one quick thing, right? On one area where we say that climate connected to land restoration, agroecology and finance, we're working together now with a small number of countries to try and synthesize the scientific evidence on carbon removal, agree a set of methodology and try to approach back to IPPC, because we think if we can bring the science and get the not just the scientists, the countries behind this, and say these are some of the methodologies that work, we can kickstart stuff. And where will that finance go? Into land restoration, into other practices.
Yeah, so the positive examples, and what I also take from you is that in the end this is a multilateral process. So I'm going to move to Tom. So Tom is Senior Policy Officer, Global Climate Policy and Food Security, if I'm catching it correctly. He has been involved in the negotiations specifically on agriculture, so this Sharm el-Sheikh joint work on agriculture conversations, and I'm assuming quite a lot of us in the room have been following those conversations. I was in a couple, and I looked up the title, right, of the Sharm el-Sheikh joint work on implementation of climate action on agriculture and food security. So then if I look at what came out of the negotiations, just procedural conclusions. There was conversations around brackets and maybe more brackets. So maybe Tom, first to you. I know it's a multilateral process, so it's not you leading it, but what's your reflection on why are we just talking about brackets and kind of procedural conclusions? What happened? Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yes, thank you. Well, thank you for actually holding me accountable here. It's just before I kick off, you asked the question, but how well is everybody aware of what we're actually discussing in the agriculture negotiations? Or shall I just add some brief lines on the run-up that might be useful? So what's actually quite unique is that for agriculture there is a separate working program, and agriculture is actually the only sector in the UNFCCC where there's a specific working program. So for that, I think it's quite ambitious, and this working program, this working program, the Sharm el-Sheikh, started at the COP27. Where it was decided to have actually 2 workshops, with the first workshop in this program to be organized in Bonn last summer. And this workshop was on systemic and holistic approaches for sustainable agriculture. So if you cast the net out wide, this is what the workshop was on. And the negotiations we had, especially last week, because we rounded in need of with the procedural conclusions. These negotiations were on the one side on what we wanted to take out of the workshop report, and there was also a little part on the conclusions of the SCF forum, the Standing Committee on Finance forum. And I think the challenge in these negotiations is that you can only move as fast. You can only move as fast as the pace you're given. And I think 2 things happened at the same time during last week's negotiations. On the one side, we encountered a situation where a lot of the countries weren't able to coordinate. We, at a certain point, couldn't really progress any further in order to come with consensus on text, because parties weren't able to come with a coordinated position. This was, and I really don't want to be pointing the finger, but just to point out the process that was going on. This particularly happened with the coordination of the largest group in the room, that's the G77. And it makes sense as well, because it's a lot of countries, and then to be able to come to a coordinated position, I also kind of understand. And at the same time, I think what we're encountering in the negotiations is that on the one hand, the Brazilian presidency is very ambitious, but it also creates an atmosphere of pressure. And in this case, I think the furthest that we could come in this atmosphere of pressure was to make sure that we came with these enhanced procedural conclusions. So during the informal meetings, we actually had some really good discussions. The Brazilians or the presidency proposed to come with procedural conclusions where we could have some wording on that we have some good and meaningful exchange of information. So I think that's a small win. And then to take the draft text that's out there with the brackets and brackets and brackets. Actually, we were at the AgriZone. It's a sidetrack, but we were at the AgriZone on Monday. We saw a monkey with the negotiators group. We saw a monkey there in the forest area, and we decided to call that monkey brackets. And now we are able to take this text to Bonn. I think for the Netherlands, which is negotiating via the EU, such as all the other EU countries, it's paramount that we actually are able to take this text to Bonn and then to negotiate further on this text and not a new text. But it's we're only able to move as fast as the pace we're given in these negotiations, and I think this was all that was in there.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Maybe the shutter speed was too high, maybe for the negotiations. Yeah. I quickly want to move to James. You want to add on to the negotiation?
Maybe. So I think that we need to take a step back. I mean, you get it. I'm a glass half full guy and not half empty.
We need that.
We got a procedural agreement, right? Which is not a non-agreement, right? We don't have to go back to where we were last time round. But I think we also have to look at what's at stake here, right? There's a reason why agriculture is a track on its own. Because when food prices go up, governments go down, right? That's the simple part, right? You can't substitute away from eating, right? You can't, so agriculture is super, super sensitive. So I go back to this thing about this idea of a small number of states, countries moving together, demonstrating what can be done, and nudging their partners in a direction. And today we also released a statement with Norway, Brazil, Sierra Leone, and Cambodia on more, better, higher quality, more accessible, predictable climate finance for food systems, right? We need to begin to have that conversation about food. Food is not transport or energy. Energy's got a small number of providers, a large number of users, and it's fairly homogeneous.
Yeah.
Agriculture is a large number of providers in very heterogeneous circumstances, and we still don't know how to get $10 billion to 50 million farmers in Kenya.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think you're referring back to the F word. Dan mentioned the F word, finance, right, in all of this. Maybe a question to both of you, because I mean we've been talking about the negotiation, action agenda, all the other stuff happening here in the blue, green, agri-zone, a lot of zones. There's been this draft circulating of the Muchirao text. The first one didn't reference agriculture. I don't know. I think it was being published now. I don't know. I haven't seen the latest version. I don't know if it got in there, but I don't know if either of you want to share some reflections on why was it missing? Is it important that it's in there? And maybe an update on the new text, if you have it.
Yeah, this was also the question that we were asking ourselves. So I think it's paramount that something on food and agriculture systems or sustainable food systems should be in there. And for the first text, I'm actually not really sure what happened, but I really expect that. But maybe the text is already out there now. I really expect that in the second text, also the presidency will come with a text on food and agriculture, or at least a paragraph, because it needs to be in there. And this COP is being organized in Brazil, in a country that I think where all the challenges surrounding food systems, food security, but also biodiversity and deforestation are really at the center. So I think for everyone, it's really at the most important to have something in there, and then the next step will be to be able to have a text that all the parties are able to live with.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, James. Quickly.
Yeah, I mean, is it a surprise that it's not there? No. I think it's the way we imagine things, right? If we start to imagine agriculture, well, then it's only 2% of the economy. Or 7% of the economy. It's a falling part of the economy. If we think about food systems, then even in Italy, it's 21% of the economy, so it's actually super important. it's part of the challenge that you get to try and include things, to try and include everything. I think it's really important it is there, because the agriculture negotiators also, the countries need to know what the part this plays in the overall picture, right? And it needs to be as inclusive as possible, because people need to see themselves in it if it's going to be a real mutirao.
Yeah, thanks. Love the reference to getting it into the picture. Totally in theme with the session. I'm gonna shift the camera to the audience because we've been zooming in, and I also want to give others to kind of share their picture of maybe their latest picture, or what's been in focus for you, and then based on that we can also exchange a little bit. I don't know if there's maybe Marielle. Can I ask you to start? You do need to come up to the stage because otherwise the wire is going to snap, and I don't want that.
Shall I stand here? So hi everyone, I am Marielle Karsenberg. I am a partnership builder at the Netherlands Food Partnership, funded by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of Agriculture in the Netherlands, to really be an independent convener of partners from private sector, government, civil society and research to accelerate food system transformation collaboratively for sustainable food systems in the low and middle income countries. I think this Action on Food Hub is a great example of such partners already coming together and sharing their experiences and building momentum forward. But we need to work on those silos much more. Bringing those partners together, having those conversations isn't easy. It requires a lot of time, trust building, energy, boldness to step into conversations that might be quite difficult. But I've been quite energized by seeing different partners in sessions actually coming together and having such conversation in these climate spaces. My particular focus during this COP has been on that sustainable part of food systems. It was kind of my own realization 3 years ago, working on my own farm, that we cannot talk about sustainability without talking about biodiversity. So that is something that we've been exploring at the Netherlands Food Partnership now, together with 150 organizations from around the globe, to see how we can actually really inform policies and practice to better work on that nexus of biodiversity, climate and food systems. And it's very relevant in the climate space as well. Those conversations have been going well. I think the science is definitely there. There are definitely examples from policy, also from Colombia, that we've learned from this morning, about how they are building bridges between the different Rio conventions, but also in practice with private sector finance, civil society, that show really how it can be done. And that is an important link, I think, at this COP of implementation, that we don't just talk about mandates that are important for governments to build those linkages, and also for the Rio conventions to come together and work in synergy more, but that we really understand how we can work from practice and show how farmers, indigenous communities and other partners are already working on this. I think it's kind of growing to have those conversations in this space. I was really energized by the conversations with the COP presidencies yesterday on synergies between the Rio conventions. Unfortunately, the climate COP for next year wasn't there yet, I think, because they are not announced yet. But definitely CBD, CCD, and Brazil now are very eager to work towards those synergies. And these synergies are natural. The silos are human-made. So it's up to us as a community to break those down and to have those difficult conversations and to make sure that we make use of the opportunities that are there in those linkages, rather than only focusing on the trade-offs or trying to work on them in different spaces. I'll leave it there.
Thanks. I'll let you pass out. Thanks. That's actually already quite a nice zoom out. Also looking at the Rio trio, as they call it, right? Yeah, on the overlap and where can we amplify. I also know there might be others in the room. I'd be curious to hear if you want to share kind of what's been your triumph this COP, or maybe your biggest failure, if you're wanting to share, or also questions to me, Tom, James. Any thoughts, questions? Thank you. I am going to ask you to quickly jump in. I can also hand over the mic, see how far it goes. Not far enough. No, you have to come up here.
Yes. Sorry, I've got this hanging now here. My name is Marita Hutjes. I am Dutch. From Oxfam Novib, the Dutch Oxfam. We've worked for years on agriculture, including with the ministries in different ways. And I guess we're also known for the fact that we've also worked already for, 15 years on climate finance. It's the F word. So part of what gave me some hope is when I heard you talk about like this signing to actually start increasing that climate finance.
Countries now want to talk about financing and to stop talking about climate financing, and I think that's the really good direction.
Yeah. I guess what the reflection that we would have is if you think about synergies, then actually if you start looking into adaptation finance, if you start looking into resilience, if you start looking into, then it's the same. Again, it's synergies. But really bringing it, you came here now to learn. We would be happy to continue the conversation as well on how to actually link those, because we've really also in our own work in many countries, we've integrated the different elements, because nowadays in the current setting, they can no longer be apart. But that also sort of shows that, yes, agriculture is a very complex issue. But climate finance is and remains essential to actually start fulfilling those agendas as well. So I guess to follow up on the hope, which other opportunities, moments, initiatives do you see to actually expand it? So to start building on it, because it's limited. We know that if we talk about agriculture, if we talk about regenerative agriculture, if we talk about smallholders, it's less than 2% of the finance that reach the most vulnerable. So how can we actually start increasing that? How can we start working on that?
So for me, if you can't imagine it, you can't do it, right? And at the moment, I look at countries on one side asking for more money, very large figures, on the other side talking about bringing in the private sector and the money needs to come from somewhere else. And actually, if you go down and you look at the climate finance that's being given, it's like there's much more money that could be taken up by climate finance by countries, but they won't apply for it because it's in the form of loans. On the other side, we know that the private sector can't get in because it's not properly de-risked. I think as a food community, we need to start to come together with countries and trying to imagine what the climate finance is and start to look at the capital from a holistic space, not looking at it only from the quantity apart from the quality or apart from the access or the predictability. It's not a question of just grants versus loans. It's a question of concessional loans. It's a question of who can access that money. What's the missing middle? How do you get $10 billion to 40 million Kenyan farmers? Let's start to understand what this is together, because at the moment, if the agriculture community goes to the finance community, well, it's the same reason why agriculture wasn't in the main statement, right? They're not high on their agenda. If individual parts of the agricultural community come together, talking with very different ideas and very different ways to the finance community, it's just falling on deaf ears. We need to start building inclusive coalitions about what climate finance could look like. From my perspective, it's about trying to get the Alliance of Champions countries to become clearer about what they mean, and this is the first statement, and I hope as they get to know each other, those statements will be deepened and nuanced. It's about looking towards the Food and Agriculture for Sustainable Transformation initiative, led by FAST, which has 50 countries inside it, and some of the countries in the Alliance of Champions are there. Maybe they can play. Maybe it's a small number of leadership countries that can play a role within a larger number of countries, right?
Yeah.
I think we need to be imaginative, but we really need to know what we want to do as first as countries, but also as broader community for agri-food systems.
Yes, thanks. Tom, do you have any thoughts? Or otherwise, I have a follow-up question for you. Because I think this was already a good question on kind of looking ahead, zooming out a little bit. Can you maybe share a little bit from the Netherlands perspective? I mean, we both studied in Wageningen University. We have some history there. There's a rich landscape. I think quite a lot in the room are connected somehow to the Dutch. What's maybe your reflections more generally with that background, being here at COP? Where do we go from here? Where do you see kind of some opportunities into next year, thinking about how the negotiations might come up, or just more broadly?
Yeah, I think it's a double question, or maybe the answer is double. So on the one side, I think for this, whatever you want to call it, if you want to call it a transition to sustainable and healthy diets, if you want to call it sustainable food and agricultural systems, I think a lot of in terms of knowledge, in terms of solutions, it's already there. And I think one of the main challenges is indeed what you are saying. How do we combine this and to make sure that we are able to implement or to go forward and actually reach agreements? I think one big challenge one big challenge for the Netherlands, for example, is to make sure that we also come to these decisions, so that the leadership needs to be there. The future might be a bit brighter looking forward. And it requires ambition, but it also really requires the advocacy that we're hearing in this room as well.
Yeah, thanks for that. And we're gonna have time also to reflect. There's amazing coffee also in this pavilion, so after this session we can definitely exchange a little bit more. But I'm gonna zoom out now. I want to thank you as the panelists. Maybe a round of applause would be very suitable. And I'm going to invite some experts with different perspectives to take us a little bit, also shifting the camera again to next year, kind of seeing what maybe was out of frame this COP and what should we be focusing on. So for that, I want to invite Simon from SNV, who will kind of be in the driver's seat for this conversation. Also Paul van Locht, who's from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands, and the colorful Anna Maria from Gates Foundation, to hopefully get some thought-provoking conversation going before we go to coffee. So I think, Simon, I can give this... No, I can give you a mic. There should be 3.
Can they reach across? Is this one working? Yep.
It's a bit of coordinates.
All right, so thank you very much. I came in for the last 20 minutes or so of what seems to have been a great conversation. And I think we've got about 15 minutes together to tease out perhaps some optimism, some key takeaways. Let's remember this is the last one, if I remember rightly, was the finance COP. This one is the action COP, right? So tease out maybe some actions that we've heard, and then perhaps a little bit, or like, really zooming out. Where do we need to go further forward beyond COP? I'm Simon O'Connell, CEO of SNV. I'll let the two of you introduce yourselves as well. So, Ana Maria Lobo Guerrero, I will start with you. Kind of key positive takeaways.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, almost afternoon. Thank you for inviting the Gates Foundation to contribute to this conversation. I am the director of Adapted and Equitable Food Systems under the Agricultural Development Program of the Gates Foundation. That means that I work with my team towards advancing, scaling climate smart agriculture, especially focusing on small scale producers, especially focusing on women farmers and entrepreneurs, and also making sure that the food that we are producing contributes to increasing the consumption of a healthy diet, so a very strong angle on nutrition. So positive. So from the Gates Foundation side, we started working, I think, 2 years ago almost, on this idea of changing the narrative about adaptation. And somehow one of our big objectives for this COP was to elevate the importance of climate adaptation, especially considering agriculture and health. And I think that positive thing that I have been feeling in the past 2 weeks is that the conversation in relation to adaptation has been elevated. Perhaps I'm a little bit biased because I have been speaking and attending to the events that are speaking about adaptation, but I see momentum. I see that especially this COP has been really clear in terms of making the point for the importance of working, thinking, understanding, and addressing the gaps in relation to advancing a climate adaptation agenda. So for me, that's a positive thing, and I go home with that.
Great. I'll, Paul, perhaps see if your microphone is working. Yep. Good. Over to you, Paul.
Thanks. I think I would say what do you take from COP is they take it back to the food systems thinking that was started like 5 years ago, and be much more ambitious in that than now. I'm actually a little bit disappointed how far Brazil got agriculture and the work program ahead in this COP. I was here for 4 years before I changed to my current position as head of climate in Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I thought Brazil is the country for agriculture, so this is what they would put on the agenda much higher than they actually did. And I don't know what happened. Maybe they thought everybody's expecting that, so maybe that they would sort of be suspicious in doing that. So I don't know. So that's one. I think my sense is that we're still in agriculture and food. We're still thinking we're going to innovate ourselves out of trouble. That thinking, engineering thinking is very strong in this part of the world. I think in Europe, we're slowly realizing that if we don't change diets, if we don't change sort of the whole thinking of how can you feed your people in a sustainable manner, you're not going to get there. And also in Africa, I think there's some really dramatic developments that require really big steps. So if the water is running out in parts of the Sahel, and what it means for agriculture and sort of livelihood for some of those population groups, which are large groups, what does that mean for our interventions? Do we keep trying to keep them there? Do we treat and I think in food systems, I think they're too careful. So be in that sense, in that field, it should be more dramatic and bigger thinking and bigger outcomes, and then take that to the COP. And then the COP will listen and feedback to the food systems.
Great. Okay. Thank you both very much. I'm going to cheekily chime in with a thought from myself, if that's okay. So my sort of positive takeaway, I can feel, despite the fragmentation, the weakening of multilateralism, whatever words one chooses to use, I can feel more country ownership starting to happen. I can see a number of examples of whether it's energy compacts or country platforms being set up or deepened. I think that's great. I think that's hugely important. And there's more needed, of course. What I would like to see going further is not to confuse country platform or country ownership with real context-driven, locally led development. My two greatest development thinker influencers, appropriately being in Brazil, Paulo Freire and Robert Chambers, which I distill down to being about power and participation. And so what I'm What I'm wondering is how do we, and how wonderful to hear the announcement from the Gates Foundation, terrific commitment. I wonder how much further we can go to enabling really participatory, inclusive approaches, and can we somehow go further with country platforms that are being established to make, we could even look at kind of citizens assembly models around country platforms and country portals. We could look at making available information around private sector activities and investment opportunities. Paul, you'll know our Dutch Fund for Climate and Development with FMO, which is about a €500 million fund, mobilizing ticket sizes of about 15 million euro into things like tiger shrimp in the mangroves of Vietnam, or solar irrigation in Cambodia, horticultural preservation in East Africa. But how can we bring those ticket sizes down? I think it was James who was touching on this a little bit earlier. What about exploring some portal where some of the real participants around smallholder farming have visibility on that, who can shape better the investment opportunities, and then who can aggregate them through to the investors that have the capital, but we keep hearing don't know about the origination or the opportunities. So that's a bit of a long-winded, slightly rambling takeaway, but if it makes sense, we'd love to hear any perspective or any further thoughts from you.
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts from my side, and perhaps that connects also to what Paul said in terms of being very technology focused, and perhaps we are missing part of the story or the ingredients for the solution. So at the Gates Foundation and with the 1.46 billion announcement, we have been, so especially because we only have 20 years to demonstrate impact, and it sounds like a long time, it's not. We continue to be focused on innovations because that's what we do. We have expertise, we know how to work with that. We believe that we can make a difference, but I think that a little bit what it's changing is that we are being very explicit about the impact pathway from all that upstream work into delivery. And that's where the importance of the locally led adaptation and having communities leading this agenda in terms of how do you build those innovations. And specific examples, so a lot of the work that we do at the Gates Foundation, it's on improving seeds. We have been very explicit from the very beginning of asking what are the traits that we want to take into account for these better seeds, that they really understand the needs on the ground, both men and women. So I think that somehow this is speaking about what you said. I think that we believe the technologies, the innovations, the better seeds that respond better to droughts. But from the very beginning of that process, we need to understand and we need to co-generate with users, in this case, the small-scale producers, how this innovation should be built. So that's one thing. The other thing in terms of your platform. So another reflection from my side from these 2 weeks is that almost in every panel that I have been participating, the 1% of climate finance going to small-scale producers has been talked about. And I agree that we need to think hard on how do we increase that percentage, because we know that we need to bring more finance to small-scale producers. I still believe that we are missing part of the process, which is, and it speaks about what you said, investors, is not clear which are the bankable projects that are led by farmers, by communities, that take into account these local specificities that investors could jump in. So where do we have the compelling evidence for these very locally led projects in terms of the increases in incomes, in terms of reducing risks, in terms of economic benefits in general, stability of economies, growth of jobs? So I think that we still need to develop or to get information together in terms of this bankable pipeline of projects, and with farmers, pilot them and get those economics right. because I think that we still struggle a little bit in terms of having that evidence that can bring investors into the table. And then we decide, of course, we need grants, we need concessional finance, we need commercial finance. But I think that we are missing a basic point and that they're still not strong enough.
Thank you. Paul, would you like to come in further on that?
Yeah, I'd love to. So I think for the finance, we're often looking at the wrong innovators to do that work. So the innovation has to come from the financial sector and not from the farmers. We talk about missing middle, and it's like, oh, there should be a loan available for like up to 1 million or 2 million. But that's not for the farmers to say or the donors to say, because it's a commercial sector. So in the mobilizing finance and the innovation that needs to take place there, we need to look at local banks and like agri-finance, etc., and try to empower them to come up with innovations that would work. There's good examples for that, right? So there are banks in countries that have sort of interest rate discounts when climate smart practices are introduced, or there is example, even in Brazil, at the Plano Safra, if you hold on to a large area of natural reserve, you'll get a discount on your interest rate. That's all good. If you want to really go bigger on that missing middle, I was part of the Global Innovation Lab from CPI. I thought there was great stuff coming out of there, but it has to be connected to actual profits coming out of those middle income projects. Otherwise, it's like if we do it as donors, we always think we can do everything, but we're not good at commercial stuff. We just like we maximize our losses, not our profits.
Yeah, thank you. And just to come back on my perspective on that. So Anna Maria, I hear that, and I do think there's something about opportunity in crisis at the moment. The crisis of official development assistance, brutal slashing, and I'm sure all of us in this room would agree that there was a need for ODA reform. I'm sure all of us would agree that the structures and systems were no longer really fit for purpose. But hopefully none of us would agree at the depth and the speed of and the manner in which the cuts have come about from certain countries. However, we haven't been catalytic enough with our grant financing for far too long. I just came from Kenya last week. I'll just give you two names, two examples, fabulous smallholder farmers, Urbanus and Victoria, working on a program. We have now a 10-year partnership with the IKEA Foundation called Power for Food. It's productive use of renewable energy and regenerative agriculture. Those two smallholder farmers, their knowledge of solar drip irrigation, their knowledge of biodigesters and how to capture your biogas and harness your bioslurry, their ability to catalyze a movement in the communities in Machakos where they live, it's extraordinarily powerful. What's missing, though, is that the grant monies that SME and others have been making available, it's not yet strategically deployed enough to enable a climbing along an impact capital continuum. And I think here's the opportunity in crisis. There's a real opportunity if we can price in that grant money to investors, yeah? If all the due diligence and de-risking that the SMBs and others have been doing for years, price it in, yeah? Make that information available to potential investors, and I like your smiling, by the way. If we price it in better, we'll bring down the cost of the investment money. And then you know what? The grant money, where it's desperately needed in El Fasher, in Western Darfur, or in Gaza, or in Eastern Central African Republic that we're not hearing much about at the moment, then we get the grant money to work better, and we get the continuum to happen. So hopefully we can catalyze a bit of that at the COP here. I don't know how we're doing for time. I was told we have 15. Any closing remarks?
So, no, I was smiling because I realized that we were short of time, but I agree with you. And actually, part of the things that we are doing in the climate finance efforts, it's working with organizations such as ASELI in Kenya, actually, and we see a lot of opportunities to get to that price. And it is, I don't think that it's easy. I agree, in nature, I agree with your proposal, but I think that we need to be very careful on how we do not rely on the grants. And there has to be a real clear impact pathway on how do we go from subsidies, which at the beginning are needed, and I agree with you, and incentives, but in a holistic way where we can land in that right price, that it's not an artificial price, so that this is sustainable. But I totally agree with you. I think that working with SACOs in terms of giving the information, the technical assistance for being able to give more loans in terms of climate adaptive solutions for small-scale producers is also one way to go. I think that there's the whole ecosystem that we need to work on. But bottom line, I agree with you. I think that we can be more catalytic.
Thanks. So this is my first COP since 9 years, and 9 years ago there was no food hub, there was no people from Ministry of Agriculture or no colleagues from the food security team. So I think like this having this here and having this closely connected to climate is a big win. I do think that agriculture is as stubborn a sector as the fossil fuel sector, so it's very hard to get it moving in the right direction. It's very political, so we can have a lot of sort of romantic sort of outcome thinking, but we have to be very realistic about how political it is, and also how much of wrong decisions are being made because of that political context. But I think you're here, we're here, and I think that's a big step forward. So I hope that in the work program we'll continue and we'll have it in the end text, and I think it will increase because we have a few really big challenges ahead. So thanks for organizing this, and I have good faith that it will go forward.
So thank you. Thank you. Great discussion. Wish we had longer. So what I heard there, political, so participation and power. Back to those two P's that I started with. But thank you very much for joining. Thank you.
Hello, it's still on. Yeah. Thanks, Tom. So before we wrap up, I think thank you also, Paul, on kind of reflecting back on how far we've come, right? This action on Food Hub being here, this rich ecosystem, I think, of Dutch and global partners is only strengthening, and we should build on that. Also, I think the conversation highlighted there's still things to figure out, and I hope also during coffee we can exchange as partners how do we kind of start tackling that. But trying to wrap up, I mean, we've developed some negatives, I think, in this session. We had some snapshot, we had a panorama, we zoomed in, zoomed out. But I want to invite Tom to kind of take the final picture with us and take us into the coffee as well.
Thank you very much. I think always a challenging thing after some good discussions that another white man takes the stage to take it away. So I will keep it very short. I want to thank everybody for these very meaningful conversations. And I also think that what we are able to achieve today is also what's really at the goal for the Netherlands. So to bring parties together, to build these partnerships, to be able to make sure that together we can move forward on this very, very difficult topic. So thank you, Leanne, for moderating this session. Thanks for Dan as well. Please extend the thanks. Thanks for all the participants, Tseneta, the colleagues from Oxfam, Netherlands Food Partnership, SNV, Paul for attending, Anna Maria. And please, there is some very nice coffee and continue the conversations there. Thank you. Take a picture together because that was